Members, the minutes from the 15th and the 17th of March have both been circulated. Are there any amendments, adjustments, corrections, omissions that need to be made? There are none. Those minutes are confirmed as printed. The minutes of the 19th of March have been deferred. Messages from the governor? There are none. Announcements by, announcements by the speaker? There are none. Messages from the Senate? There are none. Papers and other communications? You'll note that the order paper indicates that there are none. However, the Minister of Finance is doing a statement this morning on the Bermuda's economic recovery plan, and there should be a communication that a report that would have gone along with that. And Minister, would you like to just have that submitted now under communications?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, thank you for your indulgence. Mr. Speaker, I move that this Honorable House take note of the summary report of Bermuda's Economic Recovery Plan.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, members, for the indulgence. Petitions, there are none. Statements this morning, there are 3 statements listed on your order paper. Again, members, I'm going to seek your indulgence because the Minister of Health would like it to be included in the statements this morning in light of the fact that the COVID situation, as we all know, is very fluid and there is need for further updating at this point. And because of it being a COVID matter, I've agreed that I'll seek the indulgence of the House to allow that 4th statement be read this morning. The members, I appreciate your indulgence for that. With that said, the first statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to advise this Honorable House and the public of the government's economic recovery plan. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact on the global economy and prompted governments worldwide to take unprecedented action. To support their economies, governments have enacted massive fiscal responses, with early estimates suggesting these have totaled nearly $14 trillion, equivalent to 14% of global GDP in 2020. As a result of the public health measures necessary to contain the spread of the virus, the International Monetary Fund expects the world economy to contract by approximately 4.5% in 2020, a decline not seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. In Bermuda, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020, the government moved quickly to take action to protect the country on the health front. This included providing emergency funding of $2.8 million to the Ministry of Health to fund personal protective equipment, testing kits, and testing equipment, amongst other things. Mr. Speaker, shortly thereafter, to assist individuals and businesses that had an immediate need for financial relief, the government instituted several temporary emergency measures. To assist employees who had been negatively impacted by the pandemic, on the 24th of March of 2020, the government implemented the Unemployment Benefit Program. This program provided temporary relief to eligible workers who were left out of work as a direct result of public health measures related to COVID-19. Measures taken to assist businesses have included extending deadlines for tax filings and the deferring and waiving of fees, taxes, and penalties. Furthermore, payroll tax relief was provided to the restaurant and bar, taxi, and hotel sectors, all of which were severely impacted by the lockdown measures that were put into place. Mr. Speaker, overall, the government's initial emergency economic support is estimated to total $127.2 million in fiscal year 2020-2021. This includes more than $60 million in the unemployment benefit programs, $12 million in financial support for small and medium-sized businesses, and additional funding for COVID-19 related health costs. Mr. Speaker, I've advised the House on a number of occasions over the last 12 months of the short-term actions that were being taken to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is not my intention to review these various policy measures again in detail. Suffice it to say, the government has moved promptly, managed implementation challenges, and has been largely effective in mitigating the worst of the economic impact of COVID-19 on Bermuda's citizens. Mr. Speaker, before discussing the next phase of ambitious initiatives and policy measures being implemented by the government to support the economy, let me emphasize that we are only in a position to do so because of the broad community support and engagement of the proactive public health measures implemented over the last 12 months. The effectiveness of policies such as the early shelter-in-place order, ramping up of testing capacity, and quick distribution of vaccines have meant that, to a large extent, the demands placed on Bermuda's healthcare and public health resources due to the pandemic have been effectively managed. This has set Bermuda apart from many other countries around the globe. Further, due to the health policies of the government, Bermuda is on track to resuming some greater level of normality in the coming months. However, Mr. Speaker, the impact of COVID-19 on the Bermuda economy may linger for a longer period of time than the disease itself. The economic impact witnessed over the last year has been much more severe than any downturn in recent memory. Where are we today in terms of economic activity? Despite resilience in international business, Bermuda's GDP is expected to contract by approximately 9% in 2020. And sectors such as tourism and hospitality, which are particularly important for the employment of Bermudians, have been severely impacted. Unemployment levels are unacceptably high, and income disparity has widened. The high cost of living also remains a challenge, and some Bermudians are struggling daily to make ends meet, despite the efforts of so many in our community to help their neighbors in times of need. Mr. Speaker, while progress was being made until early 2020 to redress the fiscal imbalances built up over a number of years, the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in government expenditures in has resulted in government finances deteriorating significantly in fiscal 2020-21. Total government expenditure in 2020-21 is now estimated to be just over $1.2 billion, an increase of $87.9 million compared to estimates made in last year's budget. Government revenue, originally estimated to be $1.1 billion, declined by 14.4% to approximately $961 million. The government therefore took decisive action to reduce spending. Notwithstanding the actions taken, the originally estimated deficit, just $19.8 million, is now expected to be $245.5 million. The government does not need to borrow to fund the current future deficits due to its strategic decision to access the international capital markets in August 2020. Mr. Speaker, the economic weakness currently underway in Bermuda has come on the back of a decade of low growth, with Bermuda facing a number of longer-term structural challenges. Today, we have significant financial commitments, including approximately $3 billion in net public debt, financial guarantees for the new airport and acute care wing, and the block grant which covers health services. There are also significant actuarial funding gaps in the Public Service Superannuation Fund, the Government Employees Health Insurance Fund, and Bermuda's Contributory Pension Fund. More broadly, there are important social issues requiring continued government attention, such as improving the quality and affordability of healthcare, strengthening education, and addressing the impact on government services of an aging population and declining workforce. As sobering a thought as it is, Mr. Speaker, for the reasons mentioned above, Bermuda finds itself on the edge of a fiscal cliff. It has a relatively high level of government debt and obligations. Although Bermuda currently enjoys very good access to international capital markets, it cannot be assumed that there are no limits on how much Bermuda can borrow. Our legacy to our children in terms of our fiscal responsibility cannot darken their economic future. Going over the fiscal cliff, where Bermuda may not be able to borrow anymore, could then lead to a cut in household incomes, increased unemployment rates, and undermined consumer and investor confidence in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, the The economic recovery plan detailed herein is the response to these various challenges. As I noted in the 2021-22 budget statement that was tabled in the House on the 26th of February, the plan for economic recovery is ambitious but achievable. It combines fiscal responsibility with a clear path to growth, employment, and greater economic equity. Derived from the government's 2020 election platform and November throne speech, and informed by leading practices from similar economies and the latest insights taken from successful COVID-19 recovery strategies internationally, our plan will deliver an economy that will work for all. Mr. Speaker, the development of the ERP has been a whole of government effort and has incorporated detailed input from across the various ministries. Over the past 6 months, key stakeholders have been consulted as part of the plan's development, and there has been extensive input from around the cabinet table. The Economic Advisory Committee that I established in May of 2020 has also provided detailed and valuable advice throughout the process, and input from the Financial Policy Council and the Fiscal Responsibility Panel has also been sought. I want to thank all of these stakeholders for their constructive engagement and acceptance of the challenge during this period. Mr. Speaker, in developing the ERP, government has been guided by 6 key principles. 1, combating the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 as a priority. 2, reducing the cost of living. 3, achieving fairness and equity. 4, financial viability. 5, fiscal prudence. And 6, timely, decisive action. Mr. Speaker, a 3-phased approach has been taken in developing the ERP. Phase 1 involved preparatory work of setting objectives and principles for the economic framework and was completed in the summer 2020. Phase 2 consisted of developing an economic model, a set of fiscal guardrails, and a set of initiatives that we refer to as the ERP blueprint, and is the detailed information that makes up the ERP, a summary of which I'm providing to the House today. This work ran from October 2020 through February 2021, and Phase 3 will focus on the effective and timely implementation of these policies. Work is being done to assemble the team required to implement the plan. Mr. Speaker, the ERP blueprint was underpinned by developing consensus with external advisors on 2 baseline multi-year GDP scenarios for Bermuda. A most likely path based on reasonable and prudent assumptions of what recovery in each of Bermuda's sectors could look like, and the severe path that is predicated on outcomes of key factors if reasonable underlying assumptions do not occur. These scenarios greatly benefited from advice and refinement from the EAC. In the most likely scenario, there is a relatively strong recovery and GDP returns to its 2019 levels by the end of 2022, a broadly similar speed of catch-up as the IMF projects for the world economy. Thereafter, growth is in line with historical averages of around 1% per year. In the severe scenario, recovery is sluggish in 2021, and GDP remains roughly 10% below its 2019 level in each of the next 4 to 5 years. Mr. Speaker, I've mentioned that Phase 2 of the ERP involved developing a prudent fiscal path for government finances and key guardrails which needed to be respected in order to keep Bermuda on the right fiscal path. These guardrails arose from an assessment of the fiscal positions and parameters for jurisdictions with a similar credit rating. The main purpose of these guardrails is to minimize the risk of a credit downgrade, which in turn could result in an increase in interest costs, difficulty accessing bond markets in the future, and a potential exodus of international business. Equally important, they are an effective communications tool for the government in committing to fiscal prudence and describing how it will meet its commitments in this area. Mr. Speaker, 2 guardrails that the government has already set out in the fiscal 2021-2022 budget are: 1, a target to return to a balanced budget in 3 fiscal years by 2023-24, assuming tourism has largely recovered by that time, and 2, the commitment to maintaining the current $3.5 billion debt ceiling. In the ERP, Guardrails were also included in line with other single A rated countries for the ratio of gross debt to GDP and net debt to GDP to not exceed 55% and 50% respectively, and the ratio for debt service to revenue and gross debt to revenue to trend downward over time from their currently relatively high levels. Mr. Speaker, the ERP blueprint contains a long list of policies to accelerate medium-term economic growth, which I stated earlier are consistent with the government's 2020 election platform and November's throne speech. The range of policies compares well with emerging pandemic responses from similar economies, with many of the policy measures being undertaken in peer countries also featuring prominently in Bermuda's platform. These include support for specific sectors and economic diversification measures, labor market interventions, and efforts to accelerate digital transformation. Additionally, Bermuda's ERP has set out a desire to go further in areas such as environmental sustainability and economic equity and empowerment, as well as catalyzing and mobilizing external investment to accelerate growth in key sectors. Mr. Speaker, the priority issues outlined in the ERP have been developed alongside several parallel and substantive initiatives that are underway and will have positive impact on the Bermuda economy, namely education reform, tax reform, and additional policies to support Bermuda's international business sector. Proposed reforms to Bermuda's education system have been set out in the government's 2020 election commitment to develop and ensure high quality and equitable education for all of Bermuda's children. These reforms were outlined by the Honorable Minister of Education to the House in December of 2020. On tax reform, the government is moving forward to establish a tax reform commission with a view to receiving recommendations of possible improvements in the Bermuda's tax system by year-end 2020-21. In addition, recommendations are already being formulated to address funding gaps in the two key pension funds that fall within the purview of the government. It is intended that continued positive steps will be taken in 2021 to address this long outstanding problem. Mr. Speaker, regarding international business, as I outlined last month in my budget statement, the government is addressing the threat to Bermuda's international business sector and therefore Bermuda's economy, emanating from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's focus on base erosion and profit shifting, and the European Union list of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions. We will also support efforts of our international business sector to be a leader in the highly competitive search for climate-related financial opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed policies in the ERP have been prioritized to focus investment and implementation capacity in areas with the highest impact for Bermuda's medium-term economic growth and development. This exercise consisted of analyzing 81 policy initiatives with a total indicative cost of $60 to $70 million, of which 31 have been identified as highest priority and includes diversifying Bermuda's economy through the growth of new industries with a focus on those with the largest expected impact relative to the government's commitment. For example, medical tourism, vertical farming, small and medium-sized enterprise marketplace, residential schemes, casino industry, subsea communications, and the space strategy. Making financial markets work better for businesses and consumers, for example, lowering interest rates, COVID-19 SME support, National Digital Bank. Building critical new infrastructure or enhancing existing infrastructure, for example, shoreside facility for fishing, water and waste management facility, electric vehicle recharging. Expanding the resident population, for example, through short-term measures such as introduction of economic investment certificate, as well as medium-term initiatives such as regularizing the position of long-term residents and making it easier for Bermudians born overseas to return home. Introducing labor market reforms and social development measures to deliver skills, employment, and economic security in the future economy. Examples would include execution of a job strategy and youth employment strategy, establishing national unemployment insurance, and implementation of minimum and living wage legislation, and developing supportive legal and regulatory frameworks for example, energy regulatory sandbox, digital and fintech, and marine development zone. Mr. Speaker, international benchmarks suggest that with the successful implementation of these 31 highest priorities, we should look to expect an increase in GDP of 1.3 to 1.5% per year above baseline economic growth of 2023. Mr. Speaker, Phase 3 is now underway. Respective ministries and government agencies have begun refining and implementing initiatives under their areas of responsibility. In addition, in order to establish strong quality assurance, governance and monitoring processes to effectively implement the ERP and evidence of value for money, an implementation team consistent with international best practice has been drawn up. The plan outlines the governance model for executing the ERP, roles and responsibilities across the Bermuda government, indicative timelines for implementation, and key performance indicators. It also describes how key external stakeholders will contribute to new policy formation. Implementation of the ERP will be coordinated and led by a new and dedicated team within the Cabinet Office, reporting to the Cabinet Committee on Economic Development and the Premier. Strong support and appropriate additional resources are critical to ensuring this team is successful and is currently being addressed. This dedicated project management office will, one, work closely with colleagues in the Department of Economic Development who are leading execution on the banner policies that cut across ministries. Two, monitor successful implementation of policies led by individual ministries. And three, report monthly on overall implementation status, risk, and resource requirements. It will operate separately from the day-to-day running of the government. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to thank all those who have played a key role in the development of this plan that is so important to the future of Bermuda. In particular, I would like to express my appreciation to the Ministry of Finance team, the members of the Economic Advisory Committee and their support team, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, Financial Policy Council, the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, and the significant number of persons in both the public and private sectors who have provided input into this work. While the future remains deeply uncertain and economic risks are mostly on the downside, the ERP provides a blueprint for a successful recovery. Effective implementation is now necessary to ensure that Bermuda maintains fiscal prudence and forges a new path to growth, employment, and greater equity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, the next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Labor. Minister?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Morning.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to announce to this Honorable House that this government has amended the policy for providing domicile in Bermuda to simplify the process for persons seeking to repatriate home to Bermuda to obtain Bermudian status. In support of the repatriation and mixed status families legislation, with particular focus on the repatriation of Bermudians born overseas to a Bermudian parent, the Ministry has removed the requirement for the production of an affidavit of domicile. Mr. Speaker, currently, in order for a child born overseas to a Bermudian parent to obtain Bermuda status, the Bermudian parent must produce an affidavit of domicile sworn before a commissioner for taking oaths or a notary public. Submission of the application is required before the child can be placed on the register of Bermuda status, thereby providing evidence that the child possesses Bermudian status. Prior to submitting the affidavit, the Department of Immigration often assists the applicant with preparing the required evidence to determine the facts pertaining to the person's domicile. Mr. Speaker, this current process of requiring an affidavit can be costly and complicated for parents. In addition, it can be extensive and time-consuming on behalf of both the applicant and the Department of Immigration, because at times the applicant must seek documentation which goes back several generations. Consequently, this process was a barrier for parents to pursue obtaining status for their children. The Repatriation and Mixed Status Families Amendment that was brought into force on September 1st, 2010 did not fully address this problem. To address this issue, we simplified the process by adjusting the requirement to produce an affidavit of domicile by including a declaration with regards to domicile in the Bermuda status application form. Mr. Speaker, this new process will make it easier for children born to Bermudian parents while abroad to obtain status prior to enactment of this act. For persons born prior to September 1st, 2020, enabling them to repatriate to Bermuda in the future. Mr. Speaker, overall, this change will simplify the process for children who were born aboard to obtain Bermudian status, help increase the residential population, and encourage individuals to reside and invest in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, by way of background, on August 31st, 2020, I announced the commencement date of Tuesday, September 1st, 2020, for the Repatriation and Mixed Status Feminist Amendment to the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act 1956 to be brought into force. One of the primary aims of that legislation was to correct the fact that Bermudians experience difficulty obtaining Bermuda status for their loved ones who were born overseas. From the commencement of the legislation in September 2020 moving forward, for children born overseas to a Bermudian parent, the parent of these children are not required to prove that they were domiciled in Bermuda at the time of the child's birth for up to 2 generations of the children born overseas. This means that if a Bermudian has a child born overseas, that child is automatically Bermudian at birth without the need to fulfill any other requirements. And if that child born overseas in turn has a child of his or her own, the second generation born overseas will also be Bermudian from birth. Mr. Speaker, to address the issues retroactively, the legislation was not changed. However, for a child born overseas prior to the commencement of that legislation, although the requirement remains for the Bermudian parent to prove that they were domiciled in Bermuda at the time of the birth, the Department of Immigration has now streamlined the application process to make it less burdensome. This is what was promised in August 2020, and I stand here today to confirm that we have completed this work. Mr. Speaker, the application form for Bermuda status will be updated. A declaration will be inserted that defines the term domicile as follows. The country in which a person is domiciled is the country that the person regards as home. Therefore, to be domiciled in Bermuda, a person must regard Bermuda as home, the place to which he eventually intends to return, regardless of the country in which he is temporary or ordinarily resident at the time. The declaration will require applicants to attest to the accuracy of their statement. The form will also be revised to reinforce that false statements on applications are liable to both fines and imprisonment. The revised and updated application for Bermuda status will be posted on April 5th, 2021 on the Department of Immigration's website. Persons seeking to apply for Bermuda status must complete the application form and gather all supporting documents, pay the application fee online via online banking, and retain evidence of payment. 3, submit all documentation, including fully completed application, supporting documents, and proof of payment in the drop box at the Department of Immigration, located on the first floor of the Government Administration Building. Application fees and online banking information for the Department of Immigration may be found on the Immigration website. Mr. Speaker, the mandate of the Ministry of Labor is to drive economic growth and job creation. The government seeks to increase the number of persons living and working in Bermuda and particularly focus on the repatriation of Bermudians. These changes align with that mandate while reducing red tape and a decades-old headache for many. This change assists persons to more easily and efficiently repatriate to Bermuda to contribute to our community and help rebuild our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Transport. Minister, would you like to present your statement?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Go right ahead.
Mr. Speaker, It has been said that there is no tourism without transport. And with the cruise ship industry, a key revenue generator for Bermuda, it might be helpful to note that on average, the economic impact from the industry is $170 million, with approximately 185 ship calls annually. In 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the island saw only 4 calls out of the scheduled 196 projected calls. In 2021, 189 calls were originally projected, and the number of calls continues to dwindle. The cruise ship schedule requires a complete overhaul because of daily cancellations. To date, there have not been any calls in 2021. Mr. Speaker, looking ahead, Bermuda is in a unique position of having a strong and proven COVID-19 response plan to mitigate the importation of the virus through legislation, rigorous PCR nasopharyngeal testing, and contact tracing. We also regularly update stakeholder guidance to keep our community safe and our commercial, private, marine, and air borders open. With Bermuda's early lockdown and stringent COVID-19 health protocols, this has been a big win for Bermuda, including Bermuda earning the World Travel and Tourism Council Safety Travel Stamp, a designation awarded to destinations with the highest in health safety protocols. Also important, Bermuda has been keeping its reproductive number under 1, and more recently, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control reduced Bermuda's travel advisory ranking down to level 2. Mr. Speaker, I feel duty-bound to share with this honorable House that the Ministry of Transport believes a solution for the safe resumption of cruising is a concept called home porting. This concept is new to Bermuda and was introduced to us by a small luxury cruise line who were so impressed with Bermuda's handling of COVID-19, they expressed interest in home porting a ship here in Bermuda. Thus, the concept of home porting in Bermuda was born out of the travel restrictions in other jurisdictions. Since then, Mr. Speaker, we have other cruise lines interested in the home porting concept as well. However, discussions are ongoing and no contracts have been signed yet. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Transport, being ever so excited about this opportunity and the potential economic stimulus from the cruise ship industry to our economy, has diligently worked with the Ministry of Health to create a framework and response plan to restart the cruising industry safely, ideally starting in June of this year. Mr. Speaker, the home porting concept means that a cruise line would use Bermuda as their home base for a cruise to nowhere or their private island to our south for 3 or 4 months. All passengers and crew would be fully immunized and subject to Bermuda's Ministry of Health COVID-19 protocols. Mr. Speaker, I believe that deems to be repeated. All passengers and all crew would be fully immunized and subject to Bermuda's Ministry of Health COVID-19 protocols. Passengers would fly into Bermuda to pick up their cruise and have the option to book a pre- and or post-hotel stay and enjoy Bermuda longer. Mr. Speaker, we have estimated a potential economic impact of over $40 million into Bermuda's economy from this initiative to home port 3 ships in Bermuda, although not necessarily at the same time. Mr. Speaker, it is important to share that there is opportunity for up to 60 additional local part-time jobs on the ground that may be created to provide extra services required to support the home porting concept in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, since taking up the post of Minister of Transport, I've learned that cruisers all over the world love to cruise, including many in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, there is pent-up demand for leisure travel, and cruise passengers in particular are keen to resume their travels, but safely. Bermuda's record of pandemic management has created significant interest in homeporting from our shores, and as such, discussions are advancing. And before this House rises for the Easter recess, I felt it necessary to advise the honorable members and the public of the ongoing efforts of the Ministry of Transport to play its part in the economic recovery of our tourism sector and Bermuda as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the next statement is that of the Minister of Health. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again for your indulgence. Excuse me. Mr. Speaker, I appear today to inform this honorable House of the latest outbreak of COVID-19 in Bermuda and the measures put in place to reduce and depress the spread of the disease. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Bermuda government made the difficult decision to suspend services, close businesses, and impose restrictions on our resident population in our efforts to reduce the spread of the coronavirus in Bermuda. The shelter in place was very necessary, and the resulting financial, social, and emotional hardship, was very real. The impact of those restrictions lingers still, and as the government works hard to support and foster an economic recovery, we find ourselves having to impose restrictions again to reduce the spread. This is extremely disappointing on so many levels, Mr. Speaker. Everybody in Bermuda is now being impacted as a result of the actions of a few irresponsible people. Now is not the time to relax our vigilance. In November and December last year, when we experienced a sharp increase in positive COVID-19 cases, our contact tracing investigations identified 3 events at 2 venues over 1 weekend, which resulted in more than 80 people testing positive and more than 550 people being placed in quarantine. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the current outbreak is as a result of social gatherings, this time in February. However, unlike last year, the epidemiological results of the most recent cases indicate that almost all of our cases are of the UK variant, which we know is far more contagious and dangerous. Mr. Speaker, also most of our new cases are being spread by local residents, and the number of people infected is growing. Our investigations so far indicate more workplaces, more schools, and a greater variety of activities are being impacted by the increased number of people testing positive for COVID-19 as they and their close contacts are being placed in quarantine. Additionally, the disease is spreading amongst a noticeable younger cohort. Mr. Speaker, to curtail the spread as much as possible, Cabinet made the decision to proactively roll back earlier relaxations and put certain restrictions in place immediately. In accordance with the Public Health COVID-19 Emergency Powers Amendment Number 5 Regulations 2021, the curfew will now be in place from 11 p.m. until 5 a.m. Bars and clubs are prohibited from serving patrons indoors, and outdoor service is permitted, but for table service only. Restaurants, bars, and clubs are permitted a maximum of 6 persons at any one table. With all personal care services, spas, beauty salons, and barbershops, staff and customers are required to wear a mask at all times. Gyms must ensure patrons keep 10 feet apart. The permitted gathering size is reduced to 10 persons, and indoor services and ceremonies are limited to 20% of the venue's capacity. And outdoor services, Mr. Speaker, including funerals, are restricted to 20 persons in total. The current 8 p.m. recreational boating curfew remains in place. Also, we recommend that those businesses who can operate with staff working remotely should do so. Mr. Speaker, these measures are serious, but this action will enable us to slow the transmission of the virus while we work to continue our vaccination program, which is vital in defeating the virus. Mr. Speaker, it will also help to get to know the symptoms of COVID-19. Do not go to work or send your child to school or extracurricular activities if you or a family member are exhibiting the following. Again, Mr. Speaker, that warrants repeating. Please do not go to work or send your child to school or extracurricular activities if you or a family member are exhibiting cough, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing, fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, or a sense of having a fever, sore throat, chills, new loss of taste or smell, muscle or body aches, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, congestion, runny nose, unusual tiredness, and headache. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note these symptoms can be and are often confused with the flu or seasonal allergies. So far this year, there have been no reported cases of the flu. If you or a family member exhibit flu-like symptoms, we urge you to speak with your GP and get tested for COVID-19. If in doubt, stay home and self-quarantine. Symptoms may appear 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus. Mr. Speaker, with the current outbreak, the Ministry of Health is working hard to contact all those persons who test positive as well as their close contacts. Again, cooperation with the contact tracing team is enormously important, and information provided to our contact tracing team is kept confidential. By quickly identifying, testing, and curbing the further movement of people infected with or exposed to COVID-19, we can slow and eventually stop the virus spreading and keep our communities safe. Identify, test, and quarantine, repeat. Even with our strategy for reducing the spread of the coronavirus, there is no doubt the government's vaccination campaign promises to be our best chance of moving beyond the pandemic. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, vaccines save lives and will allow our island to get back to normal. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 vaccine works with your immune system, so it will be ready to fight the virus if you are exposed. If you do get the disease, you are likely to experience milder symptoms and become less ill as your body is better able to fight off the virus. Those who are not vaccinated are at a higher risk of becoming infected if they are exposed to the virus, and if they become infected, they are more likely to develop serious illness compared with those who have been vaccinated. They also risk passing their infection on to others. This includes people in the population who are unable to develop an immune response to fight infectious diseases or are at a high risk of serious complications and death. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there are people with underlying health conditions such as a severe allergy to a vaccine component who also may not be able to get vaccinated. Mr. Speaker, people who cannot be vaccinated can still be protective if they are living among others who are vaccinated. When a lot of people in a community are vaccinated, the virus has a hard time circulating because most of the people it encounters are immune. In other words, the virus comes up against a dead end. Mr. Speaker, the more people in our community who are immunized, the less likely it is that people who are unable to be vaccinated are put at risk or even being exposed to the virus. This is the herd immunity that is our goal. Mr. Speaker, in Bermuda, herd immunity can be reached if 70% of our residents' population is immunized. So effective today, Bermuda will be in phase 3 of the vaccination allocation strategy. Phase 3 allows everyone over the age of 16 to register to be vaccinated. Although priority will continue to be given to those aged 65 and over, to achieve our goal of protecting the most vulnerable, everyone is now invited to register to be vaccinated. If you are unable to register online, call the vaccine hotline at 444-2498 and select option 2. If you are aged 50 and over, you can also call Age Concern for assistance on 238-7525 between the hours of 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday. Mr. Speaker, it is understandable that some people are unsure about the COVID-19 vaccine. And for those people, it is critical to get information about the vaccine from trusted sources. Such information can be found at gov.bm/vaccines, where interested persons can learn about the vaccine approval process, find answers to a number of vaccine-related questions, and review facts versus fiction when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda is in something of a foot race against the coronavirus. We must quash the current outbreak, and the new restrictions announced over the weekend will be the circuit breaker that we need. We must contact, trace, test, and quarantine as quickly as possible all those persons exposed to the virus. We must continue to vaccinate as many people as possible and as quickly as possible. Mr. Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, this Honorable House has heard me speak before about the steps we need to take every single day to help stop the spread of COVID-19. Wear a mask, physically distance, practice good hand hygiene, and download the We Health app. Also avoid the 3 C's, Mr. Speaker, of closed spaces with poor ventilation, crowded places with many people nearby, and close contact settings such as close range conversations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. That now brings us to a close of the question period, and we'll move on. Reports of committees, there are none. Question period. There are no written questions this morning, and based on the statements that were given, we have one question this morning for the Minister of Transport, and that question is from the MP Pearman. MP Pearman, would you like to put your question at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Honorable Minister. In your statement today, you indicated that this was something you hope to start by June of this year. Are you going to be in a position to give the House a further update, and if so, when?
Minister?
Yes, we can, as progress is made, we can and will update the House.
Supplementary?
Thank you. Supplementary. You indicated that in addition to the specific small luxury cruise ship company, there were some additional cruise ship companies. Are you able to say how many?
We are not in a position to say exactly how many right now, as talks are ongoing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Supplementary, a new question?
No further supplementaries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No further question.
Mr. Speaker, supplemental.
A supplementary that from the opposition leader?
Cannoneer.
MP Cannoneer, what's your question, your supplement?
Yes. Considering the honorable member mentioned that these are luxury cruise lines, and they tend to be these cruise lines tend to be smaller. Can he tell us exactly what are some of these? He mentions extra services.
Minister? Okay, Minister?
I'm not quite sure what he means by extra services.
Yeah, on the last page, you mentioned provide extra services for this home porting. You mentioned that it would create 60 additional jobs. Can you provide extra service? What those extra services would be?
That's along the lines of berthing and administration, as well as having to stockpile or to load the ship, either meaning fueling and or with food provisions and the like.
Supplementary?
Yes.
Your second
Yeah, and I was trying to get through to you. I have a question as well. Second supplementary. So those services already exist. So when you say additional, I'm just trying to calculate how you got to that point. I mean, fueling is something that is already provided. Is there any other requirements that these luxury cruise lines would have that are unique?
The handling agency for these cruise lines does not currently have the appropriate manpower to handle this added business, and thus they will have to bring on additional personnel.
Yes, and I had a question, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I think the opposition leader may have had a supplementary off of this original question. Let's deal with the supplementary first, and then we can come back to your question. Opposition leader.
Yes, can the minister confirm the names of the cruise ships that he's working with to develop this home port initiative? And then I have a supplemental to that as well.
Not at this time.
Okay. Would you like to put your second supplementary?
Will the other cruise ships willing to jointly underwrite the marketing campaign for the home port concept with Bermuda?
Yes, sir.
If the member is asking if the cruise ships are going to take on the responsibility of marketing this program to their customers, that is correct. The cruise ships will take on the cost of marketing this program to their customers.
Thank you.
Supplementary? No further?
No, those are my two questions.
Okay. MP Kennedy, you can put your question now.
Yes, it actually would be a supplementary now that is on the Cole's question because that was the subject matter. But yes, the capacity, the minister mentioned that. Can you turn your mic down? The minister mentioned approximately 40 million in revenue. So what are the capacities of these ships and passengers compared to employees?
The cruise ships will be, when they first start, they will be operating at 50% capacity, but their total capacity is, one has a capacity of 900, another has a total capacity of 1,400.
1,400. And that was based on, the calculation is based on the taxes that will be gleaned from that?
That's part of it.
Okay. What's the other part?
The other part is that you take into consideration the average cruise visitor spending, the average air visitor spending, as well as the taxes and fees that would be enjoyed from the cruise ships as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, MP Pearman, my second question. Mr. Speaker. Minister, I'll proceed with my second question. You just mentioned that the capacities are 900 and 1,400. Are those two vessels both the primary company you were discussing, or is that the primary company and a secondary company? Thank you.
The 900 and 1,400 are what they are going to be operating with, not the actual total capacity of the ship itself. But those are two separate companies. One company is going to be operating with a total capacity of 900. The other company will be operating with a total capacity of 1,400.
Thank you. Supplemental?
Yes, but your supplemental.
Thank you. In addition to those two companies identified, how many additional companies are you discussing with?
We're in discussion with one other company.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Does any other member have a supplementary? No further supplementaries. That brings us to a close of our question period. We now move on to the congratulatory and obituary speeches. Would any member like to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
It sounds like MP Swan.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, just trying to negotiate my video for you.
Okay, well, as you're doing that, go ahead and get started. You have your 3 minutes.
You got the clock on me already. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Yes,
Mr. Speaker, start off by asking that congratulations be sent to a young Bermudian in Ghana, Mr. Quentin Sherlock Jr., who was well known in the field of education at the college and through his advocacy, but he's been doing great work homeschooling and teaching golf, very much involving the STEM program, and I'm totally impressed. He's acting manager and golf pro at a club in Achimoto Country Club, and he does outstanding work, and I'm certainly looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to the day when he returns home as well, or even does a partnership with us in Bermuda, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like at this particular time to send congratulations to the daughter of Minister of Sport and the Honorable Dr. Ernest Peets' daughter, Aliyah Peets, who's graduating from George Jenkins High School in Lakeland, Florida, with a 3.8 GPA. And she's been accepted in Sweet Briar College in Virginia, the pre-veterinarian program. She's certainly done many things academically and in the sporting realm, Mr. Speaker. And she's won several outstanding competitions representing George Jenkins High School and her team, the girls junior varsity 2018 championships through cross country, Mr. Speaker, and she's an alumni of the 2020 Congress of Future Medical Leaders. I'm sure her parents and family are very proud, as we are, Mr. Speaker. The student athlete doing outstanding work down there in Lakeland, Florida, Mr. Speaker. May she continue to do well as she moves forward, and congratulations to her proud parents and family, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. You're just about used to your 3 minutes. Does any other member wish to make a contribution?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say a few words.
I recognize the voice as MP Jackson. Is that you?
Thank you,
MP Jackson, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you. I would just like to send congratulations to Craig McIntyre for becoming a fellow of the ACTEC. He is a well-known and established lawyer here in Bermuda. He's known mostly for his trust and his well-known in trust and tax law, and is very well established. And he's only one of 3 Bermudians that has been called to be a fellow for the ACTEC. So I'd just like to recognize him for that. And then I'd also like to send condolences to the Clee family. Eric James Clee of Southampton Parish, which is my home parish. He and his wife.
I'd like to be associated with that, please.
Yes. His wife Judy have been very passionate members of the Southampton community. They have always been supportive. They're gentle and kind people. And I am very sorry to hear of his passing, and send condolences to the family. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Would any other honorable member like to make a contribution at this time? MP Reach?
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry, you have your 3 minutes.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start off by associating myself with the remarks by Honorable Kim Swan for the daughter of the Minister Peets. I know this daughter well, and I've seen her grow into a young lady, and she's going to make her parents proud. So I want to associate myself with those remarks. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning with a heavy heart as I ask this House to acknowledge and send condolences to the family of my father-in-law, Mr. Howard Leroy James Otterbeard Sr. Mr. Speaker, depending on the circle that he was in, some people knew him as Stocking. To the radio audience, Mr. Speaker, he was known as the pork chop man. He was always on the radio, calling in and voicing his opinion, because he is very much a labor man, Mr. Speaker.
Associate me with other leagues.
Your association is noted.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, this man, my father-in-law, was a man small in stature, Mr. Speaker, but he was a man of great strength and reward. He was ultimately a man, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, is a member and a strong supporter of the BIU. He was a loyal, Mr. Speaker. For those that know him in the PLP, know that he was a loyal and a staunch supporter of the Progressive Labor Party. In fact, Mr. Speaker, those that may come through come through Green Acres would know that his house was actually painted white with green trim. Also, Mr. Speaker, he had some statues erected in his yard to signify different areas of his life. But these statues, Mr. Speaker, was even adorned with PLP paraphernalia, especially around the election time, Mr. Speaker. And he always made it clear that those that were not of his ilk, those that were not for PLP, Mr. Speaker, they are welcome to walk right along by and not even waste their time coming onto his property, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Atterbury is my father-in-law. He was also May 24th runner, Mr. Speaker, one of the oldest. He ran the marathon right up until his 80s. So he was, he was also well known. He was also well known, Mr. Speaker, throughout the island.
Number, that bowing is to signify your 3 minutes is up, sir.
Oh, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so as I close, I'd like to send condolences to his wife, to my wife Cindy, and her brother Howard Jr., who all looked out for their father the way you looked out for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And condolences to your family, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Would any other member like to make a contribution at this time?
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Terrell, is that you?
Yep.
Mr. Terrell?
Yes,
and you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, yesterday my wife and I were privileged to attend the celebration of life of Mr. Carl Pringle of Somerset. Mr. Pringle, a former principal officer in the prison service, he actually passed in April last year.
Yes.
And due to COVID-19 restrictions, the family of his wife, Joshua, they live in Fiji and were not able to travel at that time. So after much planning, quarantine included, the family recently arrived in Bermuda and were able to attend the celebration of life at the church service yesterday. Mr. Pringle was a good friend of Sheila and I, such that he made us godparents of his daughter, Tappy. Since his passing, Carl has been a great miss to us, and I'm sure to his family as well. And he had a very large circle of friends, so I asked that a letter of condolences be sent, as I stated, to his wife, Joshua, and daughter, Tappy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP Terrell. Would any other member like to make a contribution at this time?
Mr. Speaker?
I hear a distant voice.
Yes, because I have my mask on, Mr. Speaker.
MP Famous?
Yes, it is, Mr. Speaker. Good morning.
MP Famous, you have your 3 minutes.
I would like
we hear you faintly. We're waiting for your video as well.
I don't have my video. Oh, there it is.
And then the lawn scarf. Say the lawn scarf. Tell me, yeah, the lawn scarf.
Oh, okay. I see where you are in the conference room there. Yes. Okay. Continue on, MP.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to associate myself with the condolences for Mr. Howard Outerbridge, who was, as MPV said, my loyal constituent, my firmest constituent. He took away all my words, like I can't say much, but what I will add is that he is also the uncle to the Honorable Premier David Brett, to the Mean family, and also uncle to the clerk of the house, Miss Sharat Wolf. He is a strong Devonshire man, and we will miss him immensely. Mr. Speaker, I want to give condolences to someone who everyone knows but may not know the proper name. The proper name is Neville O'Reilly Livingston, a Jamaican, commonly known as Bonnie Whaler, who passed away earlier this month. Many would know Bob Marley, but without Bonnie Whaler, there would be no Bob Marley and the Whalers. Mr. Livingston wrote many songs. Two songs that come to mind is Dreamland, and a song that is almost like a national anthem at every wedding or any family gathering, which is the Electric Slide. So on behalf of the people of Bermuda, we wish to give condolences to the people of Jamaica for the passing of Mr. Neville O'Reilly
Livingston, only known as Bonnie Beal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP. Does any other honorable member wish to make a contribution?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable, I see the whip has been trying for a while. This video has been up and it's been trying to get my attention there. Are you ready now, Mr. Whip?
I'm ready now, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to you, sir.
You have your 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in this honorable house and ask that condolences, if they haven't been done already, be sent to a cousin of mine, Mr. Quentin Eldon Llewellyn, Binns. Uncle Quentin was well known in the Seventh-day Adventist community. He was known as a taxi driver and also known, Mr. Speaker, as a bus driver in the past.
Mr. Whip?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, that MP Weeks wishes to be associated.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, Uncle Quentin, as I called him, I'd like to send out condolences to Aunt Marie, my cousin, and also to my other cousins, his children. He will be sorely missed. He had a great personality, and in the community, he was well known. When you spoke to him, and as I saw my uncle, he was joyful, and he was pleasant, and he was accommodating. And Mr. Speaker, when individuals in our community like this pass, it says a lot about us, and a real tear comes in our fabric of our community when individuals like this pass. Mr. Speaker, I send condolences to Aunt Marie. Also, Mr. Speaker, I want to give condolences to Mr. Kenneth Richardson. Was that done last week?
Yes, that's been done.
I'll ask to be associated with that. I think we all knew the former cabinet secretary. Whenever I spoke to him, it was a broad smile. He greeted everybody in the community with this kind of, and he will be sorely missed. To his family and to all those within the civil service who worked with him, I know that they have fond reflections of him and the way that he conducted himself in the community, and he as well will be sorely missed. Also, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to mention from the Somerset community, Mr. Kent Dill, who passed in our community, and I know you want to be associated if it hasn't been done already.
Continue.
And I wish to extend to the.
I associate myself with these remarks.
Yes, with the entire house, I'm sure, on the passing of these three in the community. And Kent, as we know, he was a tradesman. He was well known in the Somerset community, well liked. And whenever you had the opportunity to meet Kent as a taxi driver or just throughout the community, he served well, and he really was someone who will be sorely missed throughout our community. I send condolences to all these families, and thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other member wish to make a contribution at this time? I think Simmons Wade, are you still intervening?
Yes.
Okay. You have your 3 minutes. We're just waiting for you to adjust your video.
Okay.
There you go.
Good morning. I would also like to send congratulations to Christ Church, actually, for their feeding program. Too often, I think we forget to give ongoing congratulations to the churches and the many organizations that are feeding vulnerable and needy people within our community. Yesterday, on Saturday, I believe, they did over 400 meals, and they are ongoing, as well as many other churches and many other organizations helping to support our people within a community. So my congratulations to them. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Premier?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
You have your 3 minutes.
A few moments. Be associated with the condolences for Mr. Quentin Binns. He was a resident of the Glebe Road, and I knew him well, and obviously extend my condolences to the whip, Mr. Simmons, and the rest of the family. I would also like to be associated with the condolences to the family of our own MP Weeks on the passing of his father-in-law. And thank you very much on both of those, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other honorable member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
MP Kennedy, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to be associated with the condolences of Quentin Pins. Quentin, to his family, his wife, Aunt Marie, his daughter, Quinnell, who we know worked in the ombudsman for a while, Kimande, his son, and other kids, Josh, Debbie, and Melody. He was a big North Village fan. I grew up as a kid under his guidance in the church, and especially amongst him and his wife, Marie, from Pathfinders. And I can recall he would always set the stage as to what a man should be and act like. And so I want to thank his family for allowing him to make the sacrifice. Many of us who were young coming along, who were looking for guidance and assistance. Also, he was a big Pathfinder, similar to Scout, and you would know about Pathfinders. And so I can remember that handshake, even when I was young, and he would grab my hand. He didn't spare any means of making sure that I felt that he was a strong man. And so I just want to thank family and him himself, although he's passed, for the life that he led and helping steer many of us as young men to know what it means to be a man in a really, really, really crazy world. I'd also like to send our condolences to MP Weeks as well, and hearing that news. It's never an easy time. Always saying he wants to be associated. But the funeral for Ben's was yesterday, Mr. Speaker. And with the new COVID restrictions, it really, really put a swing on things. So many of us were looking to attend, and it really put a swing on things for them. And I know that they're grateful for those who were able to come out. And so our condolences go out. Thank you.
Thank you, MP. Does any other member wish to make a contribution at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Premier, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to you and good morning to our colleagues, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my first item is that I'd like to be associated with remarks given by MP Weeks sent to my family for the passing of Uncle Howard Outerbridge. Certainly to my cousin and the wonderful acting principal at the Harrington Town Primary School, Miss Cindy Weeks, of course, the wife of MP Weeks, and to Howard Outerbridge Jr. and to the entire Outerbridge family. Condolences. Certainly like to be associated with those remarks. I'd also like to be associated with the condolences, Mr. Speaker, that were sent to the family of the late Kenneth Richardson, CBE, former cabinet secretary, and ask that my name be associated with those condolences when they are sent, please, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm unaware if this was done already. If it was, I'd like to be associated. Request for condolence, a letter of condolence be sent to the family of Mr. Arnold Landy.
It was done last week, but you can associate yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am uncertain. As I said, I wasn't aware that was done. But I think that for those of us who worked in media, those of us especially at the old House of Assembly, when we would go out at lunchtime and there Mr. Landy would be there when he was working for Bermuda Broadcasting News, we did get to know him a lot. Mr. Landy was an avid fan of my Bert Bliss Swizzle, and cut match time, there was always a point in time when he would be asking whether or not some Swizzle could be done for him at cut match. But it's certainly going to be a miss. It's certainly tragic. The last conversation that I had with Mr. Landy was a few months ago when I was consoling him on the death of his son. So it is without question very tragic. And I just wanted to make sure that I could be associated with condolences when the letter is sent to his family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Does any other member wish to make a contribution at this time?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
Sounds like Madam AG?
Yes, it is me.
You have your 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to associate myself with the condolences extended to MP Weeks and his family at this time of bereavement, and also with regard to the condolences extended to the families of Benton White and Kent Deal. We all can appreciate the contributions that these fine men made to our community, and we share their family's grief at this time. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the death of Donald Hassel, who's one of my constituents. He would be known in relation to Country Squire. He was the neighbor of one of my executive members and a fine gentleman by all accounts. And so on behalf of my constituency and the PLP, I'd like to extend condolences to the family of Mr. Donald Hassel. On a good note, and a final note, I hope, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate my near and dear niece, Kenny Thompson, on her continued success in Spain. Kenny is now playing for Sabitas, St. Teresa de Benaros in the south of France. And she played Atletico Madrid. She played against them on Saturday, and she was named player of the match, although her team was not successful. And what was so impressive with regard to this young woman is to hear her press conference, her press statement after the match, where she spoke the most captivating and fluent Spanish, and it just brought back memories of her as a little person and the excellence and resilience she has pursued. She's now 20 years old. She lives in Spain, and she is, oh my gracious, such a fine example of dedication and commitment to excellence. So on behalf of all of us and the sporting community, I'd like to extend congratulations to my niece, Kenny Thompson, on her continued success and wish her well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I associate myself with these remarks.
Thank you.
Speaker, associate with both of my cousins, cousin Donald and cousin Kenny.
Yes. Okay. Does any other member wish to make a contribution at this time? No other member? Before I move on, I'd just like to add my name to as association to some of the remarks given already. Of course, being from a Somerset boy, I definitely like to be associated with the remarks expressed to the family of Kent Deal. All of those who live in the West End would know that Kent was one of the definitely missed moving around our community. I like to be associated with the remarks to the Beans family. We both worship in the same faith. I know Mr. Beans, and I know his presence will be missed in the church as well as with his family, so we sympathize with them. And with Mr. Carl Pringle. Those of you who know that strong St. Kitts connection would know that Mr. Pringle was proud of his connection with St. Kitts, and never let us forget that we were St. Kittsons together. And that whenever we had a chat, it was always somehow along in the conversation, St. Kitts would come up in it, and we'll chuckle about the relationship and the early beginnings of our families coming out of St. Kitts. And I would like to add one, and that is the condolences expressed to the family of the loss of the former Chief Justice, the late Austin Ward, who passed away last month. And for those of you who knew the Chief Justice, know that he was a very quiet, soft-spoken individual, but a man of no nonsense, a man who stood for principle, a man who clearly understood and had a good, formidable appreciation for the law and respected the law and upheld it. He was a gentleman of all respect and one that was always encouraging, uplifting, and any time you had an exchange with him. I know his family has deeply saddened by his loss, and we send our thoughts and concerns from at this time and our sincere condolences to his wife and his daughters, and let them know that the community feels their loss and shares in their loss. With those remarks, we now bring the congratulatory and obituary speeches to a close. The next item on the order paper this morning is matters of privilege. There are none. Personal explanations, there are none. Notice of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, there are none. Introduction of bills, there are none. With that said, it now leads us to the order of the day. And has been customary these last couple of weeks, I've been informing, particularly for our listening audience, that we are here each day as part of the annual budget debate. Today is day 7, which is actually the final day of the budget debate. As been indicated, we put aside some 56 hours each year for the budget debate, with 8 hours being done on each sitting. Today's sitting of 8 hours will be split between the Ministry of Public Works and the Ministry of Home Affairs, and Public Works being the first ministry this morning. When the debate starts, the House goes into committee, and again for the public listening audience, the Speaker cannot be in the House when we're in committee, so the proceedings that are held in committee are under the guidance of the Deputy Speaker, who chairs the panel of chairs, and I believe it's actually the Deputy Speaker who will chair this first session this morning. So with that said, we'll ask the Minister of Finance to take us into committee, and the Deputy Speaker will then take control of the House for the next 8 hours. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now resume in Committee of Supply to consider the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2021-2022.
Are there any objections to that? There are none. Deputy Speaker, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. Honorable members, we are now in Committee of Supply for further consideration of the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2021-2022. And under the Public Works Ministry, and we'll be debating heads 36, 53,